Hello, beautiful community. Sometimes your military analysis leads a separate life to your political analysis. So let's try to bring the two together a little bit and do a very unsophisticated political analysis of Russia attempting to contractually mobilize 400,000 soldiers between just about now, the 1st of April. You can already begin. You can really see this happening in different localities in that country, and the end of the year. So they want 400,000 on contracts before the year is out, and they are claiming to be offering up to 340,000 rubles a month, which is about $4,000 US, which is obviously a huge amount of money. So let's look at this. The short of it is that I don't see how that's doable, or at least the presumption I recommend is that that's not doable, and then the question of a more coercive mobilization arises. But let's look at this more closely. Russia is a society with extraordinary levels of deprivation and inequality, with incredible problems with socioeconomic mobility, and a huge problem around disadvantaged folks being in asphyxiating debt. And you can see how this campaign to sign up the contract is trying to tap into that. And there are messages like, facing a financial challenge, you're in debt, here is a good solution, come along, you can sort it all out with one conversation in the kiosk and so on. The problem is that just by appealing to that, it's unclear how you can get to the kind of number the regime wants to get to. And there it runs into two problems. The lesser problem, perhaps, is that there is a bit of a sense now about what is going on in Ukraine. So there's a bit of a sense that you're going out there to kill your neighbor, and you might get killed yourself first. So there is at least a vague understanding that this is the reality that you're going to face. But more importantly, there is a complete lack of motivation for the war. There is both a lack of sufficient totalitarian turns in society to politically mobilize the population, so that they say, we want this war. At the moment, there are sort of there's a huge feverish pro-war, anti-Western minority, and then there's a small minority against the war, and then there are the people in the middle. Do you hate the West, and do you want to? Yeah, I hate the West. Can I get on with my day now? So there isn't enough political mobilization. There isn't enough motivation for the war that is sort of motivationally available to the majority of Russians. There is enough of a sense that something is very dark going on in Ukraine. And that can't be, at least that is the presumption I'm recommending in this bit of sort of what we could pompously call political analysis, but it's just a sort of an interpretive guess. A quite strongly weighed one. In other words, this looks quite clear. You can't outweigh all of that just by talking about people getting some money, people getting out of debt, people getting a little bit of vertical economic mobility. Now, so that means that there is political, not just military, reason to be very open to the idea that is now being proposed by many Western military analysts, that the Russians are going to run into the problem of having to do a coercive mobilization. Right? That is where they are heading at the moment. So is there a conflict between what Western military analysts are saying and what the Russian regime is saying when they say we're not going to mobilize? Well, putting aside the fact that they obviously lie, there isn't necessarily a conflict because their thinking goes out, and this is what I recommend for us to assume, about 60 days. So when they are saying even to themselves, we're not going to do mobilization, they're looking about a month or 2 months ahead. So that does not mean that they aren't going to decide to do mobilization on month 3 or on month 4, having said that they won't. Moreover, is there evidence of prep for a coercive mobilization that may need to be done? Yes, there is. There is at least conversation going on in the regime about doing these conscription notices in electronic form. And there is conversation going on about changing the laws around conscription to make it more straightforward to hold somebody accountable for refusing it and so on. So that evidence is beginning to emerge. One of the things that's really important to understand when a regime like this is prosecuting a war like that, half of their thinking is about not how to best prosecute the war, but about regime security at home. So Ukraine is trying to survive and retain its independence and kick the invader out. Russia is trying to do its best in the invasion, but also not create too much instability at home. Now, does the regime have legitimate nervousness about a coercive wave of mobilization or a series of micro waves of mobilization? Yes. Is that nervousness alarm or terror? No. And is that roughly proportional to the reality they face? Probably, in the sense that both of us dramatization of casualties in Ukraine and another wave of mobilization, and this is just a sort of presumptive interpretive guess I'm recommending, will not politicize the blob in the middle. That's 50-60% of the population that is depoliticized. If anything, my guess is, unless some very special unforeseen events happen, like very palpable cracks at the top of the regime or something happening to Putin, they're going to be just as motivated by this further wave of mobilization to turn away from reality even more than to face it. And the turning away business, as we've already discussed, is about saying to themselves, sort of subconsciously, well, we've created a kind of arrangement, and if we look in this direction, we're going to be seeing a kind of revelation that is unbearable, namely that our arrangement has ended in disaster, that our arrangement with outsourcing politics to the Kremlin has ended in disaster, and therefore we're not going to look until we really have to look. And that sort of denial and aversion of the gaze is paradoxically not cured by more evidence of how badly things have turned out coming along. And one of the solutions to that kind of ongoing aversion of the gaze by the blob in the middle is that there's got to be a very clear perception of alternatives for them, a very clear perception of action toward alternatives, and a very clear perception that they're being led by somebody toward these alternatives through a clearly proposed set of actions, and then they're going to be able to face the disaster that the political arrangement with outsourcing power to the Kremlin has generated. So that's a little bit on the relation of how the regime is evolving its contractual mobilization, how it's going to reckon with the coercive mobilization question it's going to probably run into later, and how that fits into with the depoliticization versus the political mobilization of society. This is where we're at in early April, it seems to me. Lots of love for the moment.